Okay, I'm Mary Ellen Campbell. I'm the coordinator for the LGBT Heritage Project. You're almost welcome tonight to our Pride Week History Club. The History Club is run in conjunction with the Linen Hall Library, and we run it once a month, usually on the last Tuesday of the month. Like, can I ask everybody to hit mute? And Eilish's mummy, I'll mute you in a wee second. But if I can ask everyone else to mute themselves. The LGBT Heritage Project is run in partnership with Here Am I, the Rainbow Project, Cara Friend, and is very kindly funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. So I will be asking you to please fill in the evaluation, which I'll put into the chat. I'm now going to hand you over to Michael, who's going to chair tonight's session. Michael.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to welcome you all to LGBT History Club. My name is Michael Fry. I'm one of the volunteers with the LGBT Heritage Project, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Eilish Boschert. So Eilish is a final year PhD researcher at Ulster University. She's a sociologist who focuses predominantly on social identity rituals. Her current research looks at the intersection of ritual and social movement by examining the evolution of Pride in Northern Ireland, and she's also a volunteer with the LGBT Heritage Project. And Eilish's topic tonight is the history of Pride in Northern Ireland. So she's going to be speaking for about 45 minutes tonight. And again, just to welcome you, Eilish, we're really looking forward to what you have to share with us this evening. Just to say that there will be time for discussion after Eilish has finished speaking. So if you have any questions, then please do put those in the chat, even while Eilish is speaking, and we can pick those up afterwards whenever the presentation is finished. So without much further ado, I'll hand over to Eilish.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to share my research with you today. So for those of you attending who have been involved with Pride since the very beginning, I hope that this talk serves as a walk down memory lane. I'm sure a lot of this will sound familiar to you. As Michael said, after the talk, we have an open forum and we would love to hear what you have to say. We would love to hear your stories. We would love to hear your comments. And if you're interested in participating in our project, please let us know, or sharing anything that you have. We would be delighted to hear from you. There are so many pieces of queer history that are just sitting on bookshelves or in boxes in people's lofts, and they deserve to be shared with the public. And I would like to begin the talk by saying that it's an honor to do this research and to be able to share it with you. I'm extremely grateful for all 43 of my participants who shared their experiences with me, particularly those within the LGBTQ+ community. I think that your stories are so powerful, they're moving, and they deserve to be heard, and I hope that I do them justice. So this is not an academic talk, this is a historical talk, but it's part of my research, and it's a very important part that I don't get to elaborate on as much in my dissertation. So I'm very excited to share this with you. I will be sharing excerpts from some of my interviews. Some of my participants consented to share their identities and some did not. So for the purposes of this presentation, everybody will remain anonymous. And I also want to state that I will be using the term queer intermittently as an umbrella term for individuals who don't identify as straight or cisgender. And my intent is to use that term in an affirming and inclusive way. It is my term of preference, but I understand that it has a contentious past. So I thought I would start the talk out that way. So I would like to start off today by sharing some brief background information on the origins of Pride. So the first Pride Parade was held on June 28th, 1970, and that was the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. The Stonewall Uprising was the spontaneous resistance to a police raid on the Stonewall Inn, which was a well-known Greenwich Village institution in New York City. There were several events throughout the 1960s in America that resembled this sort of resistance. However, the events at Stonewall ultimately served as the tipping point for what we now know as the gay liberation movement. And I would like to say, as a matter of course, that the language used at the time was not inclusive of the variety within the community, and it focused first on cisgendered gay men and then on lesbians.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So, and this is despite the fact that many activists at the heart of the queer liberation movement were trans women and trans women of color, like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. And in the chat, I'm going to be sharing an article with you, which I highly recommend you take a look at. And, oh gosh, here we go, everyone. So this is a very interesting article featuring an archival researcher named Brian Ferree, who discusses the state of respectability politics at the time, which was very much entrenched in heteronormativity. And we see this the world over, even today, including here in Northern Ireland. And we also see that it has been incredibly difficult for trans and non-binary people to get adequate representation, even at events like Pride. As one of my participants stated, the people at the core of that social movement have been erased from history. I think that Pride, as that initial social movement, highlighted the problems and the prejudice towards trans people and trans people of color that I think still exists. So I wanted to begin this talk tonight by highlighting the leaders, activists, and just average, everyday, ordinary people who have been pushed to the margins of an already marginalized group. Okay, so what is Pride? In my research, I have found that there is a lot of contention surrounding what Pride is or what it should be. Most agree that it should be LGBTQ+ led and orientated. Some people like to think of Pride as a protest. Others think of Pride strictly as a celebration. But a lot of people consider it to be a combination of these two things. But nearly everyone describes it as a coming together. Pride as a gathering. It's more than a means to an end. Unlike other protests, it's the opportunity for our community to gather and revel in each other. Pride is for celebration, it's for remembrance, it's about finding joy in our identities. Pride is affirming, it's playful, it's earnest, it's passionate, and most of all, it's incredibly powerful. And in the words of Tina McComb, a trans activist from Belfast, it's a celebration of our culture and our being. And I highly recommend that you watch this documentary, A Century Later. It's really good. So Northern Ireland saw its first Pride Parade in 1991 in the capital city of Belfast, but this was not the beginning of LGBTQ+ activism in the North. The evolution of Pride really depended first and foremost on the evolution of LGBTQ+ organizations and groups. Just as Stonewall was not the first demonstration or uprising for gay rights, neither was the 1991 Belfast Pride the beginning of the LGBT social movement in Northern Ireland. We see groups like Cara Friend, the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association, Lesbian Line, Foil Friend, and the Belfast Butterfly Club had been doing work for years. And these organizations themselves developed significantly from 1974 to 1991. And they created their own network of LGBT identity and support, which proliferated and celebrated within this sphere that they created. And this existed tangentially to normative socio-political and cultural spheres that dominated in Northern Ireland at the time. So queer identity existed as other and was certainly not accepted into or even tolerated by mainstream culture, politics, or society. So the LGBT network existed very much on the margins of society and established a very complex and very strong but underground network. There was very little regular public visibility. And what I mean by that is that when there was visibility, it was usually when there was conflicts or law reform. And the LGBTQ+ sphere did not participate or collaborate much with outsiders before Pride. And that's not because they didn't want to, but it was because they were rejected. So when I was doing research in the Cara Friend archives at the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland, it was reported in the 1989-1990 annual report that social groups and outings organized by these groups were the only mechanism for finding a safe, supportive environment without any fear of prejudice. And it's worth noting that even before the first Belfast Pride, a large contingent of people from Northern Ireland would actually travel to Dublin and London. But there was this unspoken consensus that Pride just could not happen in Northern Ireland. And instead of me telling you about that very first Pride in Belfast, I would like to show a short video from last year's Belfast Pride that shows some of the early Pride organizers, P.A. McLaughlin, Sean McGoran, and Robert May, talking about that very first Pride in their own words. Mary Ellen, if you wouldn't mind fast forwarding to the 1 hour, 10 minute, and 13-second mark.
One hour 13.
Sorry, 1 hour, 10 minute, and 13.
Bedford Street and Dublin Road and up Botanic Avenue.
Glass of fizz. There's more to come. Do you know how Pride came about? Watch this short video about the roots of Belfast's favourite festival.
Belfast Pride first came about as a result of a plan by Sean McGoran, the Secretary of Niagara at the time.
We were having a meeting about going to the London Pride, which we'd done for the previous 3 or 4 years. And a person, well, I didn't know him anyway, but he was more or less an unknown person, wandered into the meeting. It was an open meeting which had been advertised.
One of the young men there, a fellow called Neil Meehan, says, why do we bother going over to London? Why not have a Pride in Belfast?
But P.A. McLaughlin and myself just held our breath at this point, because when we'd said it, we'd have been mad radicals and so on. But this sort of bloke who had no background said it, and just he said it in a sort of just an inquiring tone of voice. Why not? And basically nobody had an answer to put up to him, so we had it.
It almost suggested itself. It was the idea of a week of community items, community events, culminating in a big public parade.
We decided we'd do it 6 weeks later, which sounded like quite a long time until we started getting down to the nitty-gritty, you know. It was probably quite useful that it was done on a rush, because people couldn't dream up any reasons for not doing it. And there was quite a lot of it was like a hostility to it. I mean, people just didn't want one, you know, because I don't know, it was fear. I mean, I suspect a lot of it was embarrassment that Mummy might see them from marching down Royal Avenue, you know. But it's like I said, it was spontaneous and accidental up to a point. So we had gone to the Pride in Galway the previous year, which was the first of the current round of Prides in Ireland, and that was quite inspirational, because some of us felt that a town the size of Galway can have a Pride. A place the size of Belfast should be able to work out one, you know.
The first parade started from the Art College, which I think the real reason for the Art College was it was close to, even then, to the gay section of town, and there was a marshalling space, and then it was set off. And I think a lot of other marches did that at the time, so it seemed the logical thing to do. Unfortunately, word about our activities, which was leaking out to everybody, leaked out, including that, and our enemies decided to ambush us there.
There's quite a lot of opposition. I thought at one point the opposition was going to be larger than we were.
It followed more or less the route of the May Day parade through Belfast. If you're going to cover shopping centre plus administrative centre, that's Castle Place and City Hall. Up
Bedford Street and Dublin Road and up Botanic Avenue. Part of the reason for that is that we were hoping to have some sort of event in Botanic Gardens, But then when we asked the price, we decided not to have an event in Botanic Gardens, you know.
It was actually threatening to rain, and we got this double-decker, open-topped bus, and they all got up onto the top floor and screeched their heads off all the way back. And anybody that they saw on the sidewalk was unmercifully screamed at. And there was people hiding in bushes and everything else to get away from this. And if they didn't hear us on the way to the parade, to the down, they certainly heard us on the way back.
There was a lesbian mother there, and she brought her kid up with the top deck, the open top bus, and we had a man in his late 70s on it.
It was like bedlam. We couldn't believe we'd actually done it. They could not believe it.
And I remember when I actually took the streets of the first parade, I was absolutely shaken, because there was maybe, I don't know, less than 100 of us. We were going up Royal Avenue, we had police outriders and everything else. We didn't have, I don't think we didn't have floats and music and so on. A couple of wee banners, and that was us. And the looks that we were getting from the people on the sidewalk, it was a bit sort of, you know, I thought we were going to get murdered here, just keep walking. I think it was probably, the first early prides tended to be more like the Belfast Marathon, you know, in drag, because everybody kind of got up there as quickly as possible. It was felt if you kept moving fast, that way you could sort of dodge more of the missiles.
It gathered pace as time went on, and I think we'd only had a couple of dozen. Somebody somewhere probably will sit down someday and we'll be able to list them.
I sort of appreciated the fact that some of the younger people in 1991, 91 and 92 wanted a serious demonstration or a protest. But I mean, I don't think they got the fact that you can actually make a point with a smile on your face, you know.
I just love that clip.
Well, look at that. I absolutely loved that show. Right? I loved it. I have a
thing about like looking at old pictures of Belfast, where I'm from, of course, and it's just so interesting. I was saying to Trudy just before
we went live there. It's funny how all those styles have come back. The clothes and stuff. I love it. I'm obsessed.
Oh, sorry. I just love that clip. I remember watching it last year for Belfast Pride, and I knew that I would be using it at some point. I love how much of the parade that you can see, because there's so little photographs and archives that I've been able to actually find about that very first Pride, but that footage is just so raw. So news about events like Pride would have been spread mostly by word of mouth and through independent newsletters and zines like In Your Face, Upstart, Finger Post, and Women's News. As you can see on the slide, the events were very small and they were largely social. There were a few discos, there was a lesbian film night, you had barbecues, and of course the Pride March, which they then called a dander. Visibility for the queer community in Northern Ireland was extremely low at the time. The 16th annual report for Carafriend from 1989 to 1990 indicates that while they received 1,500 new callers that year, only 60 of them were met by volunteers, 19 achieved social contact, and 16 became what they called socially integrated. And what that means is maintaining contact with others without the aid of befrienders. So that very first Pride in Northern Ireland was extremely small. There were between 100 to 150 participants. And the subsequent prides in 1992, 93, and 94 were even smaller. And as they explained in the video, that first Belfast Pride was somewhat spontaneous, organized in only 6 weeks. And this, despite the fact that there were protesters there, this did prevent some of the backlash because news of it did not spread as quickly. But because there wasn't that public expectation for Pride per se, but there was in the following years. And one of my participants, her quote is up there on the screen, and she describes her experience at Belfast's first Pride Dander as intimidating and hard to deal with, which she believes prevented people from coming back for several years. However, despite that rough start, those early prides really succeeded in significantly boosting the visibility of the queer community. In their 1992 and 1993 annual report, Lesbian Line reported that participating in Pride was essential in maintaining levels of lesbian visibility at a local level. Wow, that's a tongue twister. Levels of lesbian visibility at a local level. Similarly, Foil Friend reported in their 21st annual report from 1994 to 1995 that participation in Pride led to an increased interest in our work. It boosted their contacts with statutory and voluntary organizations, and more people were availing of their services, and they were even getting calls from potential volunteers. So what could you expect at those early Prides in Northern Ireland? So the early Pride guides are very clearly catered to a much smaller group of people. The events are concentrated to certain highly frequented and LGBT friendly and safe spaces. This included spaces like Queen's University Student Union, and bars like the Limelight, the Crow's Nest, and Parliament, names that some of you will be familiar with. The use of this space, the use of public spaces, I should say, was extraordinarily limited for queer people at the time, and visibility was low, as I said. In fact, in the 1993 Pride Guide, it includes an insert from the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association that states, "The gay community is very weak in terms of social power and prestige." And they go on to describe how it's very difficult to fight stereotypes that are upheld by the media, churches, and other dominant institutions. There are workshops and talks in these early Prides, but discos, karaoke, films, and meals really take precedence. And this is indicative of several things. First, funds were low. They didn't have a whole lot of people shoveling money towards Pride. Number two is that civic and community support was low. This was, this was the queer community celebrating the queer community. And three, Pride was predominantly a party by gay people for gay people with a dander in the middle. At this time, Pride really placed their emphasis on visibility. This was a public rejection of shame, of isolation that was imposed on queer people by their families, by churches, by communities, and society at large. For instance, in the 1993 Belfast Pride, they hosted an event at the Queen's University Student Union about the possibility for a permanent gay center in Northern Ireland. So not only was Pride about visibility, but these early Prides were really an effort by queer people to establish a better sense of community and of permanence within Belfast's public civic sphere and assert themselves as a community deserving of respect. Many events, some of which we still see today, like safe sex workshops, parenting workshops, and even just brunch, these were all radical acts of resistance. It was a rejection of isolation, a rejection of shame, and a rejection of concealing oneself. So here we see proof of that, which I think is really exciting. On the 1996 Pride Guide, on which they assert, this is your Pride. Make it a success by attending events, especially the dander, in great numbers, and making sure that the lesbian and gay community is visible and proud, a section of society to be reckoned with. So my emphasis here is that the lack of political panels, workshops, and debates did not mean that these were not political events, just the opposite. The claiming of civic space by queer people for queer people was a radical act, and it took incredible bravery and determination. As one of my participants stated, and their quote is on the screen, "Being on the streets was very much a political act. Now I think there are a lot more political events, and there has been over the last couple of years, like Pride Talks Back and stuff like that. You couldn't have done Pride Talks back in 1995. That wouldn't have been possible in the 1990s. So while Belfast Pride was growing its roots in the capital city, foil Pride was emerging in the Northwest. Like the first Belfast Pride, the first foil Pride, which was then called Derry Gay Pride and then shifted to Lesbian and Gay Pride Northwest, but for the purposes of this talk, I will refer to it strictly as foil Pride. It was focused on social and cultural events, like the first Belfast Pride. This was a small festival and it was organized by 4 women. But despite its size, it was a very successful first step toward visibility for the community. So the main event at that first foil Pride was a lesbian and gay men's art exhibition at the Playhouse. There were also workshops on lesbian and gay rights at work, sexuality awareness, parenthood, and even one just for massage. And it's worth noting that while the first foil Pride was fairly subdued and did not include a dander or a march in their list of events, the mayor of Derry at the time, named Annie Courtney of the SDLP, opened the art exhibition. And she was the first elected representative to open a gay pride festival on the island of Ireland. And that was in 1993. In fact, foil Pride had support from City Council practically from the get-go. And that's something that I'm going to dive into a little bit more later, but it's an interesting note. So similarly to early Belfast Prides, foil Pride was restricted in terms of funds, publicity, and numbers. However, they did end up getting some really great publicity from an unexpected source. In 1995, a local paper called The Sentinel published an article entitled Free Presbyterian Attack Promoted Gay Festival, Claim. This was a letter from foil Pride organizer Stephen Burkett. A local reverend named Ian Brown kicked up a fuss at the time about the Pride Festival happening in Derry, and he rather inadvertently brought a lot of attention to it. So Burkett took to the paper to thank him for his assistance. He wrote, "Reverend Brown and his friends have done our cause an enormous service." He goes on to explain that the committee does not have a lot of experience with publicity, and were it not for Reverend Brown and his minions, as he calls them, the Northwest Pride Festival wouldn't have received adequate attention. He finishes by saying, "I trust we can rely on your support to make next year's Lesbian and Gay Pride bigger and better." So the following year, the committee launched Pride 1996 by hosting a Northwest Coming Out Day on June 1st. This was an event hosted in conjunction with Foil Friend, the Northwest's telephone befriending service. They were formerly Care a Friend, but broke away. So they were staffed for 24 hours to create, quote, an opportunity for isolated people with homosexual feelings to make their first contact with the Northwest's growing gay community, end quote. So combating isolation was a major theme of early prides, both Belfast and foil. These events were first and foremost about finding, but also finding joy and confidence in Northern Ireland's queer communities. In that way, they were largely focused on strengthening and building upon that community, creating a prouder, louder, and more confident network of individuals. In the 20th annual report from 1993 to 1994, Derry's Care a Friend discussed a workshop that they hosted for Foil Pride. And the theme of this workshop was gay pride and gay identity, and it was facilitated by a local counselor. And they wrote that the workshop was very successful, helping us to feel good about ourselves. It was also a great help for those newcomers to the gay scene who attended. And I was really struck by the simplicity of this statement, because for many, that was the aim, to feel good about yourself and to feel good about your community. So how do you measure the evolution of Pride? So what I've just done is given you a brief introduction into how Pride started in Belfast and how it started in Derry. But what I would like to do now is go back to Belfast and show some of the social, civic, and political highlights of Pride throughout the 2000s into the 2010s. And I will also be doing this for Derry as well. So social looks at the attention, involvement, events, and focus. Civic in terms of the council support, mayoral support, statutory bodies and public agencies, and political in terms of protest and participation. So Belfast Pride remained relatively small until the 2000s. But here we see significant growth, both physical growth as well as growth in terms of public sentiment and inclusivity within the LGBTQ+ sector itself. For instance, in the late 1990s, there were a lot of social firsts. In 1998, we see the first workshop for transgender people and more events catered to lesbian and bisexual women. And in 1999, we also see more inclusive, albeit dated language by today's standards, which I've included on this slide here. So it says, quote, "Our pride celebrates Belfast's gay community, including lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, transsexuals, transgenders, and other queer minorities. Sympathetic straights have always been welcome as well," end quote. It wasn't until the early 2000s that LGBT became a more common expression. However, representation and events for trans and non-binary people really remained few and far between for many, many years. And in 1999, another interesting fact in terms of political growth was that we see the first civic launch for Belfast Pride that was hosted at Belfast City Hall. And one of the councillors, Dr. Alistair MacDonald of the SDLP, proposed the hosting of Pride's launch reception. And this was seconded by Councillor David Brown of the UUP. And they wrote in Belfast Pride, "Their proposal was ratified by the full council, 24 votes to 14. So the decision was totally cross-community, just as Belfast Pride has always been." And this was an extremely big deal for Pride organizers and for society at large, because this was the first time that the civic sphere was seen to be extending the hand of welcome to the queer community. We also see a lot of growth in terms of contributors to Pride. The 10th anniversary of Pride the following year in 2000 saw the first really thick and glossy souvenir guide that we see today. And it also included contributions from local businesses like Belfast Skin Works, Fresh Garbage, as well as the Northern Ireland Tourist Board and the Community Relations Council. And these are all first signs of Pride really branching out from the LGBT sector, or should I say, from civic society reaching out to Pride. So participation in the Pride parades really began to grow from this point on. 2003 saw, quote, "well over 1,000 people participating in the parade." And this might not seem like a lot by today's standards, but it grew tenfold in about 10 years. And it was very significant for a burgeoning community festival, particularly for a community that was vilified for so long. So the growth of the community is also reflected in the boldness and confidence of these Pride guides. So in 2003, there was the first event of its kind, which was called Meet the Police, and it was hosted by the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association. And they write, "This is your opportunity to tell the police how good, bad, or indifferent a job they're doing for our community. Meet them on our turf, where you don't need to identify yourself. Get your complaints off your chest." And the final message of the program encourages people to take your place in the Pride Parade and say, "I am what I am, so get over it." Be part of the ever-growing number of out and proud gay and lesbian people. Take no shit, you know you want to. Don't waste time hiding. They are the ones with problems, not you. So in 2004, we see an extension of this confidence in the physical extension of the traditional route by about 10 minutes, which they assert, or I'm sorry, the Pride organizers assert, is more of an opportunity to dance and show that we are not afraid. So this extended route indicates a willingness and a desire to be more visible in more areas. And this is also the first year that we see the Pride Talks Back prototype. It wasn't called Pride Talks Back, but it was the first political talk of its time, where politicians engaged with the queer community on community-specific issues. And it included representatives from the SDLP, the PUP, and the SEA. And topics of conversation included getting a designated LGBT space in Belfast, LGBT voting, politicians, and general politicians' neglect of LGBT issues. And the success of this initial event resulted in the first official Pride Talks Back event in 2006, 2 years later. And from 2003 to 1,000 participants in 2003 at Pride to 5,000 participants in the Pride Parade in 2006. So In the 2007 welcome address, the chair of Belfast Pride, Andy Thompson, writes, "The past 12 months have seen massive development of Pride as we continue to grow and to develop into a festival which can hold its own against any of the big name events held throughout Northern Ireland." So here we see that Pride is really creating a name for itself, and it's strengthening its roots within Northern Ireland's civic sphere. And while there were some legislative wins for the queer community in this pocket of time, like Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act, civil partnership, and age of consent equalization, these wins spurred a lot of backlash from religious protesters and high-profile politicians. In 2008, the following year, Thompson, again, the chair of Pride, wrote in the welcome address that we absolutely needed Pride in Belfast because, quote, "legislation alone does not change attitudes," end quote. But he emphasized that Pride created a platform to promote diversity, dispel myths, and win over the hearts and minds of the public. And indeed, that year in 2008, we saw the growth of Pride from 5,000 to 7,000. And this included the representation of politicians from all mainstream political parties, aside from the DUP. And they were marching in solidarity to condemn the words and actions of Iris Robinson, a DUP MLA and wife of the First Minister, who made horrific comments about the LGBT community. So perhaps as a result of this, Belfast Pride began to see more political involvement. In 2009, they ran the first political adverts in the guide from Sinn Féin, the PUP, an independent, and UUP. And this is where we really begin to see Belfast Pride transforming into the massive entity that we know it is today. So 2009 reported around 10,000 Pride participants, and in 3 short years, that number more than doubled to 25,000. So we're going to rewind a little bit at this point. Like I said, I wanted to cover the 2000s and the 20-teens of Belfast, and now I'm going to go back and do the same thing for Foyle Pride. So like I said, we're going to look at some of the social, civic, and political shifts in Foyle Pride throughout the years. And as I said earlier, early Foyle Pride festivals differed from Belfast in their almost immediate use of civic space, like the Tower Museum. And they also had rapport with elected officials, which was still rather contentious in Belfast, and still is sometimes. So in 1996, the mayor of Derry, John Kerr, and his wife, Carita, opened the 4th annual Pride Festival in Derry at the Tower Museum. However, despite that high level of civic engagement, there was still quite a lot of backlash. And the city council faced criticism from religious protesters. But Mayor Kerr emphasized his duty to cater to everyone as mayor, and that he hoped for a more open, tolerant, and pluralist society. And he defended the council's role to be at Foyle Pride by saying, quote, "You have to protect the rights of the minority groupings, and that is something which I pledged to do. That's why I went," end quote. And we also see early unionist political involvement in 1997, which we would not have seen in early Belfast Prides. Derry invited Don Purvis, leader of the PUP at the time, to give the inaugural Northwest Freedom Address. And as James Grant wrote in one of the issues of In Your Face, this was a big deal because this was the first real show of support from a unionist politician, and they really hoped that it would encourage more people from the Protestant, unionist, and loyalist communities to reach out to the LGBT community in the Northwest. And one of my participants was involved in Foyle Pride at the time. And they remarked that they felt lucky to get Don Purvis to speak at Pride because there was a dearth of support from unionist politicians. This lack of support, as well as aggressive campaigns from mainstream unionist parties and church leaders, contributed to a pretty hostile environment in the area. Participant 30 goes on to say that they didn't have a parade because they didn't think that they would have the numbers, nor did they think that it was safe at the time. And while Foyle Pride did not have a parade for many years, there was a large Northwest contingent that traveled to Belfast and to Dublin to celebrate together with the extended queer community across the island. And these acts of gathering and marching together in solidarity, affirming each other's identities, were particularly important because in the mid-2000s Derry, there was a lot of talk about Derry being the gay bashing capital of Ireland because of a high number of homophobic attacks. There was a particular emphasis on queer Protestant people who were suffering a lot from hardline statements from mainstream unionism and Protestant church leaders. So Sean Moran of the Rainbow Project in Derry remarked of Belfast Pride in 2005, "The atmosphere was unbelievable. Police estimate around 5,000 people took part. It has been said that it was the most dignified parade Belfast has ever seen." In fact, there was a Pride on Tour event, which I've posted a little picture of on the screen, that was organized as part of an initiative to combat homophobia and isolation in the area. And this initiative, interestingly enough, was supported by Derry City Council, the PSNI, and voluntary and community organizations alike. And there were also a lot of leaders and local fixtures that aimed to take a stand to make Derry a more inclusive and affirming and safe space. So in 2007, the Derry News newspaper devoted an entire issue to Foyle Pride in a show of solidarity with Derry's queer community. And that same year, Foyle Pride was officially launched by Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. So this is high profile stuff for Derry Pride. The Free Derry Wall was also painted pink in honor of Pride. And David McCartney of the Rainbow Project in Derry was quoted as saying, "Free Derry Corner has always been closely associated with the human rights struggle, and it's great that we can use this landmark to focus on gay rights." And Eamon McCann, a well-known civil rights activist in the area, also signaled his support, saying, "The wall and other murals should constantly change to reflect the needs of our society." So 2010 marked the very first ever Pride March in Derry. There were 5,000 people who showed up to march in the parade, which followed the 1968 Civil Rights March route, which led from the train station in Waterside to the Guildhall Square in Cityside. And the parade was led by Pride organizers, as well as civil rights activists, Bernadette Devlin McCalliskey and Eamon McCann. And one of my participants who helped organize the very first Foyle Pride ever, as well as the first march, told me, and their quote is up on the screen as well, "Our first Foyle Pride in 2010 had 1,000 people walking with little interaction from people on the street. It had a lot of protests from different religious organizations. I also received death threats if I went ahead with the parade. A lot of people were afraid to walk in case they were recognized. It was very difficult, and that was, as I said, only 10 years ago. But for me, it was important to have visibility on the streets." And the fact that they did have that visibility made all the difference. So one of my participants who I spoke with in early 2020 was talking about the previous year, 2019, Foyle Pride. So when everybody was on the streets marching. And she said, the quote's on the screen, but I'm going to read it. "Last year, a young person, it was their first Pride parade, and they said to me, 'I feel like I can be seen. I feel like I can be seen as a young LGBT person. But they know that I am not on my own because look at these people and this parade, and not all these people are LGBT.' And really that struck me because that's the importance, actually to walk with all these people behind you. That might be the only time that a young person really feels like this community's got my back, and that's important." So in the last 10 years, we have seen so many changes for Pride, for the queer community and for Northern Ireland in general. So Belfast Pride continued to skyrocket in terms of crowd numbers, political involvement, civic engagement, and general popularity. 2012, as I stated, recorded 25,000 people in attendance for the parade, and 40,000 only 3 years later in 2015. And we have seen further growth and engagement as Belfast Pride has progressed with more unionist political involvement and support, as well as just the general joy and visibility of the queer community that Belfast Pride brings to its capital city. And Foyle Pride also remains firmly rooted in their grassroots community-centered approach. They're celebrating 10 years of marching through the streets of Derry and 28 years of Pride with their continued fantastic support from city councils and local leaders. And these festivals have really become staples in the cultural calendars of Belfast and Derry. And we have seen other communities also become empowered and confident enough to begin their own regional prides and pride events throughout the North. For instance, Pride in Newry was established in 2012. A few years later, we see the establishment of Trans Pride and Alternative Queer Ulster in 2018. In 2019, we see the first Larne Pride, and in 2020, last year, we see Pride in Solidarity and Mid-Ulster Pride, which I had the honor of attending myself last year, which was fantastic. So all this to say that Northern Ireland is literally proliferating with pride. We have seen major attitudinal shifts toward the LGBTQ+ community, as well as the general public's enthusiasm for pride as a civic event. And this is not to discount the very real and very serious issues that we still face every day. We have a responsibility to ensure that we uplift the voices of the most marginalized within our community, and we must continue to campaign for the rights of others. However, the changes that we've seen thus far is a testament to the brave souls who organized those first events so that people like us could feel acceptance, love, and belonging. And I would really like to end on this note from a Women's News article from 1994, in which the author writes, "Just remember, pride isn't just a once-a-year thing. It's about having hope and having anger and having belief in who you are to last the whole year round." Thank you.
Eilish, thank you so much. That was a terrific, absolutely brilliant, a really, really fascinating overview of the development of Pride over the past 40 years. And you covered so many different aspects as well. And I know there are so many, there's just so much in terms of the research that you've been doing. I guess you've only really just begun to scratch the surface on what you shared tonight. So thank you so much. If anyone has any questions or comments for Eilish, feel free to put those in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and we can get you to ask a question or make a comment in person. Brian, would you like to say something? Brian, you're still muted.
Yes, it's brilliant, brilliant talk. I enjoyed it immensely. You started off in 1970. You started off in 1974, which was 5 years after Stonewall in 1969. But one of the early organizations was the Queen's University Gay Liberation Movement, which preceded by 2 years. You know, that's 1972. So I think that is an important organization, as well as the later ones you mentioned. But
absolutely. I'm just taking a note here because I hadn't heard of that. So
about September 1972 was the first gay liberation meetings in the Students' Union, and they were held subsequently for maybe every fortnight on a Thursday evening. And there were very few students at Queen's. I was one of them, but it provided an opportunity for people from Belfast and outside, you know, non-students to actually attend in a safe environment, you know, especially during the Troubles. And we were also involved in setting up the gay liberation discos in the Students' Union as well, because the Students' Union were very greatly in support of us, very, very greatly, because Northern Ireland was so far behind, you know, GB and the Irish Republic. So, but brilliant talk, you know. You can probably find information, you know, from Richard O'Leary and other people, you know, about the early gay liberation movement, which was the start of things here. So,
thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. We're getting some lovely comments, Eilish, for your presentation in the chat, and do keep your questions and comments coming, folks. Nigel, do you want to ask your question to Eilish in person? Yeah, if you want to unmute.
Yes, I can do that. Can you hear me, Eilish?
Yes.
I tried to ask the question of, do you expect or suspect that we'll be discovering any more LGBT history in the future, specifically about Ulster, Northern Ireland? Because you said about that little comment before about the books being up in the attic, and somewhere there'll be some more information, because we're actually uncovering an awful lot of information that we didn't know about before.
Yes. My research, it has really been an exercise in, I feel like I should be a private investigator now, because it's spread by word of mouth. And in fact, so many of you attending the talk tonight have spoken with me, and then you've told your friends, and your friends have told their friends. And that's really how I've gotten the information that I've gotten. You know, there are files, people have made scrapbooks that are literally falling apart. You know, they're, like I said, they're in people's lofts. One of my participants said that the very first flag that they made, or banner that they made for Foyle Pride in 1991, was just in her friend's boot, in the boot of her car. And she didn't even know it was there. So, you know, these are artifacts that we would love to have or document, that, you know, people don't even know that they have. So I would just really encourage you, if anybody that you know who grew up queer in Northern Ireland, just, you know, they don't think that it's history. And that's the thing, because it was just a normal part of their lives. They don't think that it was history, but the notebooks, the photographs, the, you know, videotapes, everything that you have, that's history. And that's documenting, you know, very important history for Northern Ireland. So yeah, I suspect that we'll be finding a lot more, but I feel like I've found a lot already. And I only wish that I could have shared more of it with you tonight.
Well, that's a good sign, because I'm very intrigued to know if there is any more history, because
there's so much.
Because if we didn't have people like yourself, then we would have had this history maybe even lost in time. And history erasure is a very unhealthy thing to have in any society.
Absolutely. And I will say that I was able to access the Care a Friend archives, which was an amazing resource. And if anybody's interested in that kind of research, I would highly recommend you go to the Public Records Office. But I was unable to access the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association archives because it was being recatalogued at the time, and then COVID hit. And you can't, it's not accessible online. And at the time, I could not actually go to the center. So I have yet to do that. So I'm sure that there's all sorts of history that I'm missing out on just from not having access to that archive.
Thanks, Eilish and Nigel. And just on that, in connection with any objects or any material that you might have, particularly relating to the period that Eilish was talking about, Mary Ellen has just mentioned that we do actually have a digital archive as part of the LGBT Heritage Project. So if there's anything you would like to donate to us or include with us as part of the digital archive, then Mary Ellen has included her email address, history@hereandI.org. Also, Mary Ellen has shared the SurveyMonkey link, and you've all been so kind in the comments that you've been making about Eilish's presentation. So do please take time to fill that in as well this evening. Before we finish. And Jude Copeland, who's one of our volunteers, says that was a wonderful, fascinating and evocative talk, Eilish. So proud of you. My question is, what was the most interesting Pride item or document that a participant has provided to you? Maybe an impossible question to answer, Eilish.
My gosh. I love all of the videos that I found of the early Prides. In fact, in one of the documentaries on the UTV archives, there's a video of that very first Pride, and they're on the top of the bus, and they're singing together, "If you're happy and you're gay, clap your hands." And it's just a moment of joy that I love so much. And in fact, you know, it's so much of this, you know, just sitting at my desk, coding my interviews and watching these documentary clips. I mean, I'm just brought to tears time and time again, because it's incredibly moving and it's incredibly powerful. And I'm just humbled by the experience that so many people, 43 people, you know, sat down and shared, you know, their history with me. And so all of it, I don't know, I can't pick anything. It's all of it.
Cara, did you have your hand up? You wanted to ask something or make a comment?
Thanks so much. It's Cara McCann, Director of Here and I. First of all, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Eilish, Mary Ellen and Michael and the rest of the volunteers from the Heritage Project. A couple of years ago, I sat down to write a funding application for this work and did not in a million years think that we get the numbers that we have got around this screen. So it's absolutely amazing. But just Eilish, just a couple of I suppose, comments. Lots of people see, as you said, Pride is a celebration, and much of Pride is a celebration. But I think some of the things that you mentioned tonight really shows that Pride is still a form of protest. And a couple of wee things I've made a note of. Invisibility, that is a massive issue for our sector and specific sections of our sector. So that's still something that we encounter every single day. Lack or we force in political engagement, you know, on a daily basis. We're engaging with our politicians to ensure that our views are reflected in policy. And just shocked, in 1993 there was a talk around an LGBT centre. That is something that I am still working on now. And what's that? 28 years later, we're still trying to find a forever home for our LGBT centre. So some of the issues that were getting discussed maybe 30 years ago, they're still as relevant today. But that was really enjoyable, and thank you so much again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. Erica, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for this. I find it really interesting. Yeah, I was surprised actually how recent a lot of the milestones have been achieved. I was actually at the first Trans Pride, and I found it, you know, it was really inspirational, and my kids loved it too. And you know, that it's, yeah, I suppose my question is more because I was thinking how recent, sorry, I'm lagging really fast. Sort of, you know, how recent everything is. Do you have hope that, you know, by the next generation, so in the next 20 years, that there will be a lot more freedom to be who you are without societal, I'm trying to think of the word, societal criticism?
Yeah, well, I can only really speak from my own experience. So I am 28. I was born in 1993, so I'm not even as old as Belfast Pride. And I just think about my own experience. In 2011 is when I graduated from high school, and yeah, many of my friends were not out yet. They came out in the 2000 teens because it was still a scary time. I remember in university, we had a GSA house, a Gay Straight Alliance house, which then underwent a lot of different name changes, but it was constantly you know, being broken into, being spray painted, being defaced in various ways, and that was even in the 20 teens. But even since then, since my graduation from university and, you know, foray into real adulthood, you know, there have been so many changes, and it just feels like, well, you know what? I'll give you a story. So in 2019, I was going to Pride, and I was decked out in my Pride gear, and I had on, you know, my earrings and my hat and like rainbow everything. And I was on the train, and I live in quite a conservative town. And an older woman got on the train with her grandson, and she sat across from me, and she looked at me, and I was like, oh no, what is she gonna say? And she goes, are you going to Pride? And I said, yes. And she goes, oh, we're going to Pride too. I just love Pride. And that, you know, it just felt like, you know, just in my lifetime, there have been so many huge shifts So I can only imagine that, there's nowhere to go but up. There's nowhere to go but up. That's how I feel. That was a little long-winded. Apologies.
Thanks, Eilish. Thanks, Erica. Eilish, I'm not at all depressed that you're only 28, okay? Not at all. Tom, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question or make a comment? If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, hello there. Good evening, everyone. My name's Tom Higgins. Just to let you know, I was formerly a member of CarFriend. I was a volunteer for 6 years between 89 and 95, and I also took part in the early Pride parades. So it was very nostalgic looking at the presentation there, and it was really brought back quite a few memories of also how frightening it was at the time. I think actually I can remember going to the Parliament and actually having 2 pints of lager to give me the Dutch courage to go on march on the first early parades, and there wasn't very many of us then. And also going back to, we used to have our CarFriend office in the cathedral buildings. I remember opening up for the Belfast Butterfly Club, and there was I don't know, people of a certain age remember those old disabled blue cars. Well, I can remember a disabled LGBT person taking a half an hour to get up 2 flights of stairs to go to the Belfast Butterfly Club. I just think it's amazing how far we've come along, that we have our own centre now. And I missed the parade for a few years, and when I came back to it, I was totally astounded. There was so many thousands going. So there's been so many changes. It's just amazing, the change in society. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Tom. Really, really good to hear those kind of first-hand memories again. Molly, I'll come to you in a wee minute. I just want to pick up on some comments in the chat. So Nigel has asked a question: given that Pride in Ulster has been getting bigger and better each year, will we have more history being made following the return of Pride? And also, I think this is maybe just for general comment, do you think the PSNI has been engaging heavily enough with LGBTQI community in Ulster? And Karen mentions that actually the Rainbow Project did a session tonight with the police ombudsman, which is on Facebook. Did you want to comment on that, Eilish?
Yeah, so I purposefully, for the purposes of this talk, I didn't include some of the more contentious elements because I wanted to focus on how Pride has grown and what it has brought to society. I know that there's a lot of different opinions on whether or not corporate sponsors should be involved and whether the police should be involved. And so all I'll say on that is that within any organization like the police, there are people who are really trying to do work from the inside out. And it might not always come through, and we might not see that, but there are people who really, really care about the queer community, who are queer themselves, within the police. And I know of a few who are really trying to do some reform within the police. So yeah, I think that there's efforts being made, and I know, and I absolutely understand and I respect the opinions of people who think yes, the police should be involved, and those who say no, the police shouldn't be involved. And I think that there are very, very convincing arguments on both sides. But yeah, I think, yeah, and that's what I'll say on that. I don't know if that answered the question. Trying to be diplomatic.
No, thanks, Eilish. And I think even from memory, earlier this year, there were some discussions even in London Pride about potentially banning the Metropolitan Police from marching in the parade there. So it's obviously not something that's, although we have a particular context, obviously, here in Northern Ireland, it's obviously not something that's just exclusive to Northern Ireland. Molly, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, I just had a wee question. Really, really well done. It was really interesting. But, you know, I had a question. Was there a sort of reluctance or like, I don't know what the word is, but talking to people about the really sensitive parts like police and that sort of stuff, were they difficult to talk about with other people? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
hesitancy.
Here's what I'll say. I'm working on my methodology right now. I've just been writing this up entirely. All of the questions that I came to the interviews with avoided sensitive topics as much as possible. In fact, the people that I approached, it was their professional engagement with Pride. These are all people who have a very public profile. I was able to find them, you know, on YouTube and Facebook and whatever, you know, through their public engagement with Prides. And I strayed away from the sensitive, you know, I wasn't asking, oh, you know, what do you think? How do you feel about this? And, you know, so anything that they brought up that was sensitive was of their own volition. And so people were really eager to talk about these sensitive issues, you know, like police involvement and like, you know, corporate sponsorship and, you know, that sort of thing. And so, no, there wasn't any resistance. I mean, they were putting their cards on the table, and I really appreciated that, you know, and I made sure, you know, if any of my interviews got heated, I made sure to say, hey, you know, if you want to come back to me and get a transcript of that and then, you know, cut some parts out or anything like that, you can. Also, anybody who has been interviewed, if you want to cut some parts out of your interviews, feel free. But no, it's yeah, there wasn't a resistance to that. It was eager.
Getting some great comments and questions coming through. And not to steal your thunder, Siobhan, but you shared a great quote. It says, harking back to Stonewall for a second, it was a rebellion, it was an uprising, it was a civil rights disobedience, it wasn't no damn riot. Stormy DeLavery, butch lesbian of color who was rumored to throw the first punch. Siobhan, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, it's more a comment and a thank you, Eilish. That was really, really cool and really informative. And I needed to see that this week because I'm going to mention Cork. Shut up, Jude. I'm going to mention Cork. It's Cork Pride this week. Across the country, there have been homophobic vandalism and graffiti incidences just this year in Dublin, in Limerick, in Cork, in Wexford. Flags being burned, flags being removed. This is why I think this kind of history and spreading awareness of it and the history behind it, of how hard it was for the people who first started all this up and how it needs to not come back around full circle to that kind of homophobia again is so, so important. My own former drama group had their own exhibition vandalized in the park in Cork, an online QR code thing that they were doing. The signs taken down and destroyed within 48 hours twice. Just this week in 2021, you know, so it is a minority of people, but I just think it just kind of shines a light on how important it is to be visible and to be proud. And, you know, it does galvanize people. You know, the whole of Wexford came out and put out rainbow flags when they heard that the one outside the council office was taken down. So I think something like this being shared, and I hope it'll get shared around, you know, I would just love to see solidarity between Belfast and Cork Pride because they're always clashing. You know, it's a bit of a shame, but yeah, no, it's a very kind of emotional week, so it's lovely, so lovely to see something about the history of this put forward so well and so engaging. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Siobhan. And for those of you who are interested, the recording of this talk will be made available on the Linen Hall Library's YouTube channel, so you will be able to pick up this talk and disseminate it afterwards. Just to pick up a comment from Kim Walsh, she says, thanks, Eilish. Noticed the early prides were in June and later ones moved to July, August. Just wondered whether there was any reason for this, especially given the fact that June is usually seen as Pride Month. Siobhan said that she thought it was because they were staggered to give people the opportunity to travel around to them rather than having them all within the one period of time. Eilish, can you comment on that?
I've also read in I couldn't tell you where, but that it was to accommodate marching season. They didn't want to get embroiled with, you know, the 12th of July marches and, you know, and the weeks leading up to that and that sort of thing. But other than that, I don't know if there was a specific reason other than just to avoid, you know, date conflicts and routes and that sort of thing.
Thanks, Kim, for your question. Thanks, Eilish. Lainey, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, just a quick question. I was just interested in that first video that we watched about the first pride. I was interested in if they kind of quote something like you know, you can make a point with a smile on your face, and you mentioned too kind of the profound experience of seeing the people singing on the bus and kind of the joy that you could feel. And I just wondered if you could touch a little bit on like the importance of joy and kind of ritual processes, and maybe of pride in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that Lainey asked that question because she knows my passion for ritual. And I am a strong believer in joy as resistance, because in a community that has been vilified for so long, that has been forced to hide in the shadows for so long, there's so much misunderstanding about the queer community. And then, of course, in the media, what we see is, you know, very important histories, of course, of struggle and of suffering. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on the AIDS epidemic and that sort of thing, but we should not exclusively look at suffering. And there's so much power in joy and in being joyful and in coming together once a year to build that emotional energy and to revel in it and to weep together and to scream and shout and laugh together. And then that energy carries us for the rest of the year and really empowers us. It's like in that quote that I ended on, that pride isn't just a once a year thing. It's about having hope and anger and belief in who you are to last the whole year round. Pride is really a fantastic vehicle. You know, there's a lot of people who you know, are very adamant, you know, pride is a protest. And I 100% agree, it is a protest. And I think that you can protest, like, you know, one of the organizers said in the video, with a smile on your face, you know, because there's nothing so, Molly, what's that Oscar Wilde quote? Is Molly still here? Oh, anyway, there's an Oscar Wilde quote. Molly loves Oscar Wilde, that says, you know, forgive your enemies like nothing angers them more. So nothing angers your enemies more than seeing you strong and powerful and happy and thriving. And so that's what I think that pride is it's a protest and a celebration, and it's for us. It's for us and our community.
Richard, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, thanks, Eilish. That was excellent, and I loved all the new material about foil pride, which that we were all learning about. Just two comments. One is you mentioned, you know, politicians coming on board over time, but I think we should recognise the role of the trade unions. Trade unions came on board in support of LGBT rights very early. And they, you know, they had a presence in terms of banners and people on prides before the businesses were prepared to come in. The second thing is, I personally think 2008 was a turning point in terms of the outburst by Iris Robinson. Not just galvanized many people in the LGBT sector, but I think it brought home to the wider society the kind of the viciousness of homophobic rhetoric. And that's the time when I saw people who would not normally, you know, middle-aged, kind of mainstream liberals who would not normally think of going to a pride, came out in 2008. And I should also mention, because Patrick Corrigan is here, it was very obvious that Amnesty International, which, you know, can't be a very, very wealthy organization, really put in resources. They flooded Pride with those placards with love is a human right, which brought home a political message to remind people it just wasn't an enjoyable day out, but also that there was some very important political issues at stake, and using that language of rights as well, which was a very consistent message Amnesty had for a number of years on Pride.
Yes, thank you for all of those comments. And it absolutely is the case. In fact, I felt very guilty about excluding the role of unions in Pride, but they were very much there from, well, there was one union in particular, Unison, that was there very early on. And in fact, even the Queen's Student Union took a very, very influential role early on in not only spreading the word about these events before Pride, but also protecting, the gay Pride organizations. They were very much, I don't know how to phrase this. It was like they rallied on their behalf. And in fact, there's an article specifically about that came out last year, and I'll see if I can find it, and maybe we can send it on email or post it on our page, because it's a fantastic article about the role of student unions, specifically Queen's Student Union. So maybe we could share that on our page, and that would be a great way to get that out.
Thanks for those comments, Richard. Emma, would you like to ask a question? Emma Sheeran.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks, Eilish, for the presentation, and apologies, I don't have the raised hand function. People have messaged me being like, you need to put up your hand. I don't have it on my Zoom. But no, I just wanted to, I suppose, sort of comment or ask a question. I find that really interesting and uplifting, and I suppose how far things have moved, from this being a very contentious and controversial event to now being totally mainstream, where you can walk into shops in the city centre and see, rainbows adorned on t-shirts and sort of political statement, and people don't even realise that it's political because it is, I know there's so much still to do, but it is somewhat normalised now, and thankfully progress has been made. But I wanted to ask a question around sort of the sort of place for the Pride sort of protest within the broader left politics or resistance politics, or sort of, progress or progressive movements. And like, we've seen different referenda, particularly in the 26 counties in recent years, and the impact that that's had on social change, and just how that, I know, like, I should have declared at the outset I'm a Sinn Féin MLA, and I know within our own party, this is, in the H-Block protest, there would have been lesbian and gays against Armagh, and those banners would have been in the forefront of the movement at that time, and it took its place that people that were for rights were for all rights. And I just sort of wondered what your view would be of that, as we see everything that's happening at the minute with what's happening in Carrickfergus, and that the same sort of people will be opposed to any injustice, and how that links in.
Yeah, I think, so it's interesting because in my research of Belfast Pride, with the Parades Commission, any parade that is logged with the Parade Commission cannot be, or I think Belfast Pride cannot be, it's not categorized as a political protest. And in fact, there were several people in my interviews who brought up in their interviews that, people who would bring placards to Pride that had political messages, whether it said like F the DUP or, any sort of incendiary message, they were removed from Pride because it could not be seen to be political. It had to be inclusive of all and that sort of thing. And a lot of people, that we're not happy with that, because they think that Pride should be a platform for expression first and foremost. And eliminating that opportunity for expression, is not good, particularly for the optics of a pride parade. I guess in terms of, I'm sorry, could you phrase your question again for me? I think I lost my train of thought.
Well, we probably sort of threw everything at you there, but I suppose just what I wanted to ask was what you thought had been the impact or the relevance of Pride as part of a broader sort of social change against oppression or against sort of conservative politics that oppress people and stop people living their life as they wish, and sort of aligning itself with other more progressive movements. And how you'll find that ordinarily people that were involved in the repeal of the 8th were probably involved in marriage equality campaign and those sorts of campaigns, and people that are involved in left politics will tend to be interested and feel sort of agitated on all of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've got two good examples, and there is a big difference for those of you who attend local prides between Foyle Pride and Belfast Pride. And Foyle Pride is very much, they're vehemently, we have a strict code that we stick by. We are anti-corporate, we are grassroots, we're community-led, and they're very, very proud of that. And and Belfast is growing, it's more corporate, there's more involvement, and many people in Belfast are also very proud of that as well. And I don't think that there is a particular right way to do Pride. I think that there's many ways to do Pride. But I will say that it's interesting with Foyle Pride because from the get-go, they were very, very political and very much entrenched in that, we are an extension of the civil rights movement. Their first march was led by the civil rights leaders. So it was an extension. It was saying, this is, queer liberation, liberation includes queer people, it includes people of color, it includes disabled people. We're here, we're fighting for everybody. And I will say in Belfast Pride, because it's such a big event and because it cannot be seen to be so political, I think it is more carnivalesque. It's more focused on that celebration. However, you still have the political leaders there. You still have unions there. There are still people, the same people who are fighting for those civil rights everywhere are still coming to Belfast Pride, and they're getting that message out. So it might be more diluted by just the size and, and the carnival element of it, and just how big and spectacular it is. But it's still there, and there's still the people doing the work in the background. So, like I said, I don't think that there's a right way to do Pride, just very different ways. And the good thing about being up here in the north is that you have so many to choose from. So you can celebrate Pride however you want to celebrate Pride.
Thanks, Eilish. Thanks, Emma, for the question. Oh, Michael, you're back in, right?
Yeah, no, sorry, Marilyn. We're gonna I think we should maybe just bring this discussion to an end because it's nearly 9:30, and we could probably talk about this for a long time. I'm just going to pick up on just one final question from the chat. This is from Mel. Hi, wonderful idea to host this tonight. Thank you. Recently, as an LGBT person working within the Health and Social Care Trust, I am taken aback by the lack of knowledge, understanding, training surrounding trans service users in many different areas throughout the trust. Is there any manner in which we could encourage mandatory training for staff surrounding this? I don't know if you have any comments on that, Eilish, at all.
I don't know that I would be the person to ask.
Yeah.
But I would love that.
Yeah. Also, we offer different types of training throughout the different organisations, the different LGBTQ plus organisations within the sector. So if anybody wants to contact us, I can get you the list of training that's carried out by the various organisations. history@hereami.org.
Folks, well, maybe just bring our discussion to an end now, but thank you so much for attending tonight, and thank you especially to Eilish for giving such a brilliant presentation and for facilitating such a great discussion at the end there. So maybe we'll show our appreciation again. So I'll hand over to Mary Ellen.
And just as Michael says, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting conversation. Eilish, fantastic. I know you could do it. I hope you can all come back for next month's. It's the last Tuesday of the month. And next month, we're going to have some of our drag queen personalities doing a wee talk about their journey. So it should be interesting also. Once again, thank you very much for attending, and please fill in the evaluations. Link is in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. It's very flattering.
Thank you.
Bye.